Energy, the focus of Ottawa's second round of projects to be fast-tracked by the newly formed Major Projects Office.
We used to build in this country, and we are building our nation.
Prime Minister Mark Carney has made one thing unmistakably clear this week. Canada will no longer apologize for being an energy superpower. In a political climate dominated by Donald Trump's tariffs and Washington's pressure campaigns, Carney has unveiled a sweeping slate of fast-tracked, nation-building energy projects. And the message behind it carries an unmistakable edge. Canada is done waiting for permission. Canada is building again, and this time it's being built on Canadian terms. While the United States is still fighting over partisan identity politics and escalating tariff threats, Canada is quietly and confidently laying the foundations of what could become the country's biggest industrial expansion in decades. And the scale of it isn't symbolic, it's structural.
The Prime Minister greenlit 3 critical mineral mines, a major liquefied gas facility, a hydroelectric plant in the Arctic, a hydroelectric transmission line, and a critical conservation corridor. And that's sort of where they are spread out throughout the country.
In the second round of fast-tracked approvals under Ottawa's newly formed Major Projects Office, Carney's government has moved forward a package of projects that cut straight to the heart of Canada's economic future. The projects span the entire map of the country. They include 3 critical mineral mines, a major liquefied natural gas project on the West Coast, a hydroelectric plant in the Arctic, a new transmission line, and even a national-scale conservation corridor that reshapes environmental planning for the next generation. The LNG centerpiece, the Silems project, ties northeastern British Columbia's natural gas fields to a new West Coast export terminal, aimed squarely at the booming Asian market. Carney's team says it is designed for one purpose, positioning Canada where the demand is growing, not where political pressure dictates. The critical minerals component is even more ambitious. Ottawa is accelerating nickel, tungsten, and graphite mines that could feed into EV supply chains across the G7, at a moment when China still dominates global processing. 2 weeks ago, Carney's government unveiled a stockpiling and offtake strategy, a commitment to buy and store key minerals to create a guaranteed price floor. This gives miners the financing certainty they need to actually start building. And at the center of it all is the Major Projects Office, a new fast-track agency that consolidates years of fragmented permitting. Instead of waiting 5 to 10 years for approvals, the government says it wants timelines closer to 2. This isn't just a list of projects, it's a declaration. Carney's approach is emerging at a moment when Canada, perhaps more than at any point in recent history, is being pushed to define its own economic identity. Trump's second-term America First agenda has weaponized tariffs, disrupted supply chains, and reshaped North American trade into a competitive battlefield rather than a cooperative system. Trump has said openly that he prefers production inside America and considers Canada's success a threat, not an asset. That context matters. Unlike Trump's bluster, Carney's response isn't emotional, it's structural. He is doing something far more strategic, making Canada indispensable. By moving ahead with LNG exports, Canada positions itself as a long-term energy supplier to Asia at a time when the U.S. is facing slowing LNG approvals due to legal challenges and political uncertainty. Recent U.S. court rulings, highlighted by AP and Bloomberg, have stalled major export terminals, tightening global competition. Carney is filling that gap. When it comes to critical minerals, the real rival isn't Washington, it's Beijing. Reuters recently highlighted that China still controls the overwhelming majority of processing for nickel, graphite, tungsten, and other industrial minerals. The G7 has been desperate for alternative suppliers. Carney is stepping forward with a direct offer. Canada can be your reliable source, but we must build now. The stockpiling program is a bold solution because it solves the miner's oldest problem. You cannot finance a mine unless the price is predictable. Carney's plan makes the price predictable. This is how a middle power becomes a strategic power. Major infrastructure in Canada has always moved slowly, painfully slowly. A linear process across 4 or 5 federal departments, plus provincial review, plus environmental assessments, plus First Nations consultation, could stretch into a full decade. The Major Projects Office is being designed to break that cycle. Instead of sequential approvals, everything moves in parallel. Instead of navigating multiple departments, companies go to one office. And instead of watching foreign competitors move faster, Canada finally acts like a country that understands the value of time. There are risks, especially around First Nations consultation. Environmental groups and some Indigenous leaders have warned that fast track must not become skip track. Carney has responded by expanding loan guarantees and equity partnerships so that First Nations communities can become owners, not bystanders. This is the quiet revolution in Canadian nation building. Inclusion through ownership, not just consultation. Trump has spent months escalating tariffs on Canada, from lumber to autos to steel, in an attempt to force more production to the U.S. He has publicly mocked Canada's energy ambitions. He has repeated his false claim that America doesn't need Canadian energy. But the facts tell a different story. As of November 2025, U.S. refineries still import 4 to 4.5 million barrels of Canadian crude per day, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. Canada supplies 2/3 of all U.S. crude imports. American refineries are literally designed for Canadian heavy crude. Meanwhile, Washington's LNG approvals are gridlocked, while Canada now has 2 major West Coast export projects moving forward. In other words, energy is the one arena where Trump cannot squeeze Canada, and Carney knows it. This makes the new fast-tracked projects more than domestic economic policy. They are a geopolitical counterweight. They tell Washington that Canada is not a passive extension of the U.S. energy system. Canada is a builder in its own right, with its own markets, its own buyers, and its own leverage. The brilliance of Carney's approach is that it revives a very old idea. Canada used to build things: pipelines, dams, transmission lines, northern megaprojects. Generations of Canadians were raised on the idea that the country could shape its own destiny. This package of projects brings that idea back, not as nostalgia, but as policy. It says, Canada can compete, Canada can supply, Canada can lead, and Canada can do it without waiting for the United States to approve. Carney's fast-tracked energy plan is not a set of announcements, it's a roadmap. It positions Canada where the world economy is moving: cleaner grids, strategic minerals, Asian LNG demand, and secure supply chains. It reshapes Canada's bargaining power with the United States. It signals independence in a global system where middle powers rarely get to set the pace. And it sends a reminder to Canadians that the world is not waiting, and neither should we. The question now is simple. If Canada really is becoming an energy superpower again, who will feel the impact first? Asia, China, or Donald Trump?
60% of Americans are opposed to Trump's tariffs. And of course, there was all this news coming out of the World Series, right? Canada tariffs. We're not just talking China, we're talking Canada and tariffs.
In Donald Trump's second term, Canada has become the center of a political storm and the symbol of a deeper loss of confidence among Americans. New polling from CNN shows that 60% of Americans now oppose Trump's trade agenda, marking the steepest drop in support for any major policy of his presidency. What makes this shift even more striking is that it began not with China or Mexico, but with Canada, the country most Americans have long admired and trusted. In the fall of 2025, Trump imposed a new 10% tariff on Canadian imports after an Ontario television ad mocked his economic message. What might have looked like a show of strength instead revealed how fragile his standing had become. Americans didn't rally behind him, they recoiled. They questioned why their president was punishing a neighbor so closely tied to American life. The numbers tell the story. Trump's tariff politics are losing the people, and the fallout is spreading far beyond Washington.
So the bottom line is this: if I were advising President Donald John Trump when it comes to his policies, I'd say step off the tariffs, at least from a political point of view, because the bottom line is it doesn't sell with the American people.
The public turns against Trump. Back in late 2020, most Americans still gave tariffs the benefit of the doubt. Polls then showed 52% in favor, 48% against. 5 years later, that balance has collapsed. By October 2025, 6 in 10 Americans told CNN and Gallup they oppose Trump's trade taxes. Only about a third support his new measures on Canada. The frustration cuts across party lines. Working families say everyday costs have climbed, while business owners complain that uncertainty is choking investment. Economists once called tariffs a temporary tool. Voters now see them as a permanent headache. Trump's promise to make America win again feels distant when grocery bills rise and manufacturing jobs still haven't returned. Even inside his own coalition, cracks are visible. Manufacturers in Michigan, farmers in Iowa, and retailers in Pennsylvania, the very states that helped elect him, now speak of lost contracts and shrinking margins. What once symbolized economic strength has turned into a symbol of strain. The same policy that defined Trump's rise is now defining his decline. The breaking point came when Trump decided to target Canada. Picking a fight with China feels strategic to many Americans. Picking a fight with Canada feels personal and wrong. Polls released by CNN's data unit show that Canada's popularity among Americans stands at plus 49 points, while Trump's own approval rating sits 10 points underwater. Canada is not just another trade partner. It is the friendly neighbor, the reliable ally, the country that Americans consistently describe as the nicest people in the world. Every time Trump attacks Ottawa, he offends that image. What makes it worse is timing. With the economy flat and inflation stubborn, voters see no reason for another confrontation. They look north and see stability, cooperation, and shared values, everything missing from Washington's rhetoric. For them, tariffs on Canada are not about economics anymore. They are about judgment. A president who can't tell a rival from a friend looks less like a strategist and more like a man picking fights to stay relevant. The result is political isolation. Americans admire Canada more than they trust their own leader on trade. That single comparison, popularity plus 49 for Canada versus minus 10 for Trump, captures why this policy feels like a mistake no speech can fix. If the backlash in the United States was sharp, the reaction in Canada was historic. Only 2 years ago, in 2023, just 7% of Canadians considered the United States a threat. By mid-2025, that number had surged to 48%, according to Pew Research Center. Almost half the country now describes America as a potential danger, not a partner. This is more than anger. It is a psychological shift. Canada's sense of security, long tied to friendship with Washington, is breaking away. Canadian media openly describe the U.S. as unstable and unpredictable. Political leaders, from Prime Minister Mark Carney to provincial premiers, talk about building new trade bridges across Asia and Europe instead of waiting for another tariff fight. The cultural distance is growing too. Surveys by Environics Institute show record levels of national pride tied to independence and self-reliance. For the first time in decades, Canadians no longer measure their prosperity by how closely they align with American policies. Americans still adore Canada, but Canadians have stopped believing that admiration is mutual. The emotional alliance that once defined North America is eroding, replaced by caution and quiet resentment. Inside the United States, the political price is becoming clear. Congressional Democrats now describe Trump's trade taxes as self-inflicted wounds. Congressman Brendan Boyle of Pennsylvania, a senior member of the Budget Committee, points out that 40% of total U.S. trade involves just 3 partners: Canada, Mexico, and China. When tariffs hit one of them, the shock ripples through the entire economy. He argues that tariffs make life harder and more expensive for everyone, and polls back him up. Independent voters increasingly link tariffs to inflation. Small business groups call them hidden taxes. Even Republican lawmakers privately admit that Trump's one big, beautiful bill of tax and spending cuts has not delivered tangible relief. Instead, it created larger deficits and a sense that policy now serves the wealthy first. Meanwhile, the government is edging toward another shutdown as internal divisions deepen. Moderate Republicans warn that voters in border states like Michigan and New York are furious over lost exports. In simple terms, Trump's promise of economic nationalism has become a domestic liability. What was meant to show strength abroad is now exposing weakness at home.
While Washington argues Ottawa is moving on, Canada's government has redirected its trade focus toward Asia, sealing investment frameworks with the ASEAN bloc and renewing talks with the European Union. The strategy is clear: diversify before dependency turns into vulnerability. Prime Minister Mark Carney's message during his October trip to Malaysia summed up that new mindset. He spoke about sustainable growth, rule-based cooperation, and reliable partnerships, principles that resonate strongly across Asia. Canada's pivot is not defiance for its own sake, it is survival through adaptation. In less than a year, Canada has positioned itself as a bridge between Western economies and emerging Asian markets. Energy, technology, and critical minerals are the foundation of that plan. While Trump's White House counts tariff percentages, Ottawa counts investment pledges. The contrast could not be sharper. One nation is building barriers, the other is building trust. For Canadians, this new direction feels liberating. For Americans, it is a reminder that leadership by punishment has limits. The neighbor once treated as a junior partner is now acting like an equal, or in some arenas, a step ahead.
Trump's second-term tariff gamble was meant to prove that economic power could restore political dominance. Instead, it has shown how fragile both can be. Public confidence has collapsed. Allies feel betrayed, and the friendship that once defined the northern border now feels uncertain. The numbers are undeniable. 60% of Americans reject Trump's tariffs, and nearly half of Canadians view the United States as a threat. These are not abstract opinions. They are evidence that the moral and emotional core of the U.S.-Canada relationship is breaking. Tariffs were supposed to make America stronger. They made it more divided. They were supposed to make allies respect Washington's strength. They made them question its judgment. In politics, power depends on persuasion as much as force. And when a leader turns the country's best friend into an adversary, the message heard around the world is simple. America's greatest opponent might be its own stubbornness.
I'm disappointed that I came to Canada, a Canada that it is very, very difficult to find Canadians who are passionate about the American-Canadian relationship. Elbows up, me too. It was an anti-American campaign.
At the start of 2025, President Trump launched his second term with an aggressive trade agenda. The White House imposed reciprocal tariffs ranging from 10 to 50% on key sectors, including steel, aluminum, copper, and even automobiles. Canada, America's closest trading partner, was hit immediately. Exports slowed, supply chains shifted, and the political climate turned tense. Yet when U.S. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra arrived in Halifax, he told the Chamber of Commerce that this was not a trade war.
The cabinet's now saying that we're at war with America. That doesn't help, okay? Maybe in Canada saying we're at war, maybe that's something that Canadians stand up and say, yes, 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 okay? We have an enemy. I don't think so.
He accused Canada of exaggerating, of playing hardball, and of branding the United States as an enemy. The paradox is clear. Washington fired the first shot with tariffs, but now claims that Canada is overreacting. What the ambassador called negotiation, many Canadians experienced as direct economic pressure on jobs and communities.
We haven't really had a lot of luck with Canada. I think Canada could be one where they'll just pay tariff.
Don't push a Canadian too far. I mean, push too far. Push too far.
Prime Minister Mark Carney framed the situation differently. For him, the phrase "elbows up" was not an anti-American slogan, but a way of telling Canadians to protect themselves when pushed around. That message resonated across the country. Families cut back on trips to the United States. According to Statistics Canada data for August, cross-border travel by car dropped 35%, while air travel to U.S. cities fell 25% year over year. Air Canada reduced flights south of the border and instead added 28 new international routes to Europe, the Caribbean, and South America. Consumers also adjusted their choices at home. Industry reports show American liquor sales in Canada plunged 62% in the latest quarter, forcing companies like Brown-Forman, the producer of Jack Daniels, to issue profit warnings. Loblaw, the country's largest grocery chain, removed dozens of U.S. items from shelves and replaced them with more than 100 Canadian suppliers. Even culture shifted. Indigo reported that sales of Canadian-authored books rose 25% year over year, while CBC Gem streaming surged 34%, lifting programs like Murdoch Mysteries and Heartland. These are not just slogans, they are real changes in daily life.
The numbers tell an even bigger story. Canadian exports to the United States declined 2% this year, equal to roughly 5 billion Canadian dollars. That is a real loss. But exporters quickly looked elsewhere. Shipments to the United Kingdom jumped 63% in value, and sales to Europe rose 26%. In fact, the United Kingdom has now displaced China to become Canada's second-largest trading partner. That shift demonstrates how pressure from tariffs has accelerated diversification. While Washington expected Ottawa to soften its position, Canadian companies found new buyers and new routes. The boomerang effect is hitting U.S. businesses hard. Alcohol producers have lost market share, and once Canadian shelves are restocked with local brands, that space is difficult to win back. What began as an attempt to squeeze Canada is instead eroding American commercial presence north of the border.
Ambassador Hoekstra urged Canadians to stop treating the United States as an adversary, but the direction is already changing. Prime Minister Carney traveled to Mexico this month to reinforce trade and energy cooperation. Ottawa is deepening links with Europe and the United Kingdom. Canadians are shifting how they travel, what they buy, and which markets they serve. The tariffs that were meant to reassert U.S. power have done the opposite. They have redefined the relationship, leaving Canada more self-reliant and less dependent on its neighbor. Trump wanted to prove that tariffs could force compliance. Instead, they are pushing Canada to stand taller, with Carney guiding a pivot that is reshaping trade, culture, and everyday choices. The backfire is no longer a prediction, it is the new reality of North American economics.